The child came in the dead hush of winter, when hoarfrost pinned the shutters closed and the wind scratched like claws against the sodden roof. They wanted a son, the man especially. A son to bear his name, to break the land, to pass his violence down like a crooked heirloom. But the child was a girl, blood-slicked and wailing, and for that alone her mother paid in flesh. They named the girl nothing. Not even a curse, not even a scornful brand to stitch across her swaddling. Just the silence of a man walking out before the afterbirth was cold, spitting once in the snow and dragging his boots through the threshold like the ground itself offended him. Her mother, Marion, bled. She bled for 3 days, then lived with stitches sewn wrong, hips crushed inward like a collapsed fence post. No midwife came, just the smith's wife, who laid her iron tongs on Marion's belly and prayed with a voice like rust. They were in the outermost corner of Breaker's Hollow, where the creek ran black and crooked under the hills and the land bucked with shale. The farm was inherited from a father who drunk himself into the earth, the husband inherited from a bargain Marion's mother made before she hung herself in the stable. The girl's life was not counted. She was fed when there were scraps, kept from the fire when the coals hissed high, beaten only when her cries lingered past the hour. She grew with quiet teeth. She learned to make herself smaller than noise. Her mother had no songs, only murmurs in the dark, broken things, cracked prayer names of saints long outlawed. The girl learned to mimic her mother's limp before she learned to speak, and she did not cry, not after that first winter. The smith, his name was Malric, but no one said it near his forge, watched her. He was not a kind man, but he was hard, and in that hardness there was at least a rhythm. Iron did not lie, he once said. It bent or it broke, that was all. The girl watched him from behind the trees, from under the rain barrel, from the edge of the field where nails worked free from the barn posts. She watched how he turned the earth's cold ore into lines that could kill or hold. When she was 6, her father broke her arm, not in rage, not even in discipline. He simply saw her reach for a knife to cut into a roasted parsnip and brought his boot down like he was striking a stone. The girl didn't scream. Her mother did, but not aloud, her face contorted, eyes wide as winter pools, lips chewed until they bled. The girl carried her useless arm in her shirt for a week until the smith's wife pulled her aside and reset it in the dark behind the coop. That night the smith left a ring in the ashes of the hearth. A small thing, forged of river iron hammered into a crescent, not fine, not adorned, but solid, small enough for a child's finger. She didn't wear it. She swallowed it. The ring sat in her belly like a truth. She felt it when she ran, felt it in her sleep. It was a name she hadn't earned yet, a promise forged too early, but she kept it inside. The years grew jagged. Boys went to war and didn't come back. The Black Hills uprisings drew in every able body. Her father volunteered not out of patriotism, but because the army promised coin and legal forgiveness for his old debts. He left Marion with a limp and the girl with silence. When he returned, he had a crooked scar over one eye and no tolerance for crying, or breathing, or presence. Marion began to go missing for hours at a time. She'd sit in the root cellar in the dark, hands in her lap like she was waiting for judgment. The girl fed the animals, mucked the stalls, dragged water uphill alone. At 11, she bled. Her mother found the stain on her bedding and slapped her so hard her ear rang. Then she wept into the girl's shoulder, over and over, whispering, "Don't let him know, don't let him know." But he knew. He came in drunk, leather belt drawn, not speaking. That was worse. He didn't beat her, not that time. He cut her hair. With the same knife he used to gut trout, sawed it off in jagged chunks and said, "No man's gonna look at you now." Then he buried the knife in the wall beside her head and left it there. That night the girl dug in the snow and found the ring. It had passed through her when she was still small enough to forget pain quickly. She buried it under the stable stones, deep enough to be hidden, shallow enough to be found again. The iron was cold, rusting at the edge. She cleaned it with spit and straw and slipped it on her smallest finger. She didn't know yet what it would be. Ring, coin, blade, name. but it was hers. The smith died the next spring. His forge still burned, but his hands had started to shake, and he wouldn't let the boy apprentices see him fail. One morning they found him nailed into the frame of his own forge, upside down, like the old saint who'd prayed to suffer more than Christ. The town whispered it was suicide. Others said it was punishment. The girl believed neither. His tools were sold, his wife vanished into the northern ridges. But the forge stayed cold and empty. Until the girl, barefoot and 14, walked in one day and lit it again. She had no claim. No one stopped her. No one dared. The iron remembered her. Marian didn't speak of it. Her face was half sunken now, skin like wax, hair brittle from years of grief too tightly wound. The girl brought her bread and let her sleep. The father barely noticed the change. He drank, he spit, he spoke to shadows. One day he came home to find a horseshoe nailed into the door wrong ways, and when he tried to pull it off, he broke 3 fingers. He never mentioned it again. The girl took no name. She was just the forge whelp, the bastard flame, the girl with the ring. But she made tools no one else could shape. She carved spurs that left no blood on hide. She twisted chain links so fine they'd vanish between the fingers. And she watched. Always watched. Waited. For what the ring had promised. For what the blade would need to become. The summer that came after was a cruel one. The creek ran to bone. The wheat bent before it ripened, and 2 children from the far side of the hollow were bitten clean through by a rabid dog no one could trace. The girl didn't sweat in the heat. She fed her forge with thornbrush and bogwood, built a bellows from hide and copper wire. Her hands grew harder than stone. Her eyes stayed quiet. She was 15 when the widow Tamber brought her the first real commission. "My son's gone," the woman said, voice like a fence post weathered dry. "Not dead, not yet, but the world's got him. I want something for him to wear, in case he remembers me, in case he doesn't." The girl asked no price. She carved a ring from iron so dark it looked soaked in rain, bent it around a nail until it clicked like bone. Tamber left a duck's egg and a flask of homemade liquor in thanks. Others came, a mule handler needing bridle bits that wouldn't snap on a hill road, a trapper wanting caltrops for wolves, a seamstress asking for shears that could cut burlap and silk in the same stroke. The girl made them all, said little, stared too long, and gave back more than what was paid for. But there were still nights when the house stank of old whiskey and gun oil, when Marian locked herself in the root cellar again, and the father paced outside with a cleaver in one hand and a hymnal in the other. On those nights, the girl sharpened things that didn't need sharpening: hooks, awls, the inside edge of a belt buckle. She hadn't spoken to her mother in weeks when Marian finally called her name. Not girl, not you, but the name she wasn't meant to have. It was dusk, cattle lowing in the pasture, cicadas whining like a blade being drawn. "Ruth," Marian said. The girl stopped. "I want you to leave this place," her mother said. Her face was sunken deeper now, the bones beneath her eyes sharp like flint. "Not run, leave, take what's yours and go." Ruth said nothing. Her fingers were black from soot, her sleeves burned at the cuff. "You're waiting," Marian whispered, eyes gone glassy. "But there's no justice coming, only fire, and I'm too tired to burn with you." Ruth knelt beside her, held her mother's wrist like it was a bird's. She didn't cry. Neither did Marian. That was long behind them, but something passed in that silence, a weight, a knowing. Marian kissed her brow and then turned to face the wall. The next morning, Ruth moved the forge stone. It took hours. She pried it loose with a crowbar and a rusted hoe blade. Beneath it was a vault of clay jars wrapped in horsehair, things the smith had hidden, not gold, not silver, but blue ore from the Black Ranges, oilcloth bundles filled with gunstock molds, 2 hammerheads made from stone-hard meteorite. And a blade, half finished. still rough along the edge, but perfectly balanced. The tang etched with a mark Ruth had never seen before, 3 ribs and a broken sun. She didn't speak. She began to finish it. She forged alone for 7 days, ate nothing, slept in shifts between the coals. On the 8th day she quenched the blade in pig's blood and wrapped the hilt in rawhide stripped from the saddle her father never rode. She did not test it. She sheathed it in a scabbard made of ashwood and nailed shut with her old baby teeth, which her mother had kept in a cloth bundle all these years. She buried the blade again, this time in the grave of the old plough horse, deep in the north field, where the ground never froze too hard and the crows didn't go. Then she waited, and the man came. Not her father, a rider, tall, broad-chested, gold buttons and a military satchel crusted with dust. He rode a gray gelding and smelled of salt and smoke. Ruth saw him from the window of the forge and felt something in her gut twist like a barbed hook. He asked for her father. He asked again when told her father was sick. Then he went into the house anyway. Ruth didn't follow. She stood in the yard and listened. Her hands stayed black, her eyes stayed still. He was with her father for less than 10 minutes. When he left, his gloves were wet. He climbed on his horse and tipped his hat, said, "Tell your mother he had it coming. Tell her we didn't forget." Then he rode. Marian came out of the house and sat on the stoop, blood on her dress, but not hers. "I need you to build something," she said. Ruth said nothing. "Not for me," her mother continued. "For her." Ruth blinked. "The girl you might become if you live." That night Ruth built a ring. Not the one she'd swallowed, not the one she'd unearthed and worn since. A new one, wider band, slightly heavier. Etched inside with a phrase in a dead dialect, "Ash rises," forged from the same iron as the hidden blade. When she finished it, she didn't wear it. She gave it to Marian. The next morning, Ruth's father was buried. No one asked how he died. He was planted face down in a ditch with lime and a warning cross. A bird took his eye before the soil did. Marian did not attend. Ruth stood over the grave for a full hour, watching the earth settle. When she turned away, her boots left no tracks. In the months that followed, Ruth trained. She learned the old methods from scraps in the smith's ledger. She learned weight, balance, when to use the flat and when to cut. She tested grip strength against stone, parried shadows until her shoulders ached, and practiced drawing the hidden blade until it came into her hand like breath. She did not speak of vengeance. That would have made it too small. She didn't sleep much, but when she did, it was dreamless. Marian grew quieter. On her last morning, she kissed Ruth's hand and said, "Do not let the world decide what you're worth." Then she walked into the woods with a bottle of oil and a length of rope. Ruth never found her body, but she wore the second ring on a chain from then on. The forge stayed hot. The blade stayed buried. And Ruth waited again. But not for permission. Not for justice. For the right hour, when everything burned the way it ought to. The winter came sudden, not creeping, not warning. One morning the ground was mud, and the next it was glass. Trees cracked like gunfire in the wind. The forge hissed each time Ruth fed it, and the horses in the hollow stabled themselves without prompting, like they knew something larger than cold was coming. Ruth was 16. She had no family left, not a name. The house was hers now, but she rarely slept there. Too much dust, too many echoes in the boards. She lived beside the forge, in the smith's old lean-to, with a cot and a trunk and a line of tools sharp enough to whisper. She sold knives now, not hunting blades or field cleavers, but knives made for the closeness of things, skin, silence, the pause before a scream. The men who bought them didn't ask questions. They paid in coin or sacks of feed or whatever they had to barter. One gave her a rust-bitten revolver with only 4 working chambers. She kept it under her cot, never fired it. Her hair was longer again, not soft, not brushed, just wild, tied back with a leather strip cut from her father's old saddlebag. Her arms were stronger than most farmhands, her gaze steadier than the preacher's son, who stuttered every time he passed her on the road. But Ruth spoke little. She watched more than she worked, and she worked more than she ate. Hunger had long since become familiar. And then the riders came. Not one, not a lone soldier like before. A full company, draped in black oilcloth and saddle blankets that stank of tar and saltpeter. They weren't army, they weren't marshals. They wore no insignias but bore weapons with state sigils scorched off the barrels. 5 men, 2 women, all hard-eyed and burnt brown by travel. Their leader was a pale woman with no brows, dressed in a butcher's apron and silver rings too clean for country dirt. They came with one question. Who's the girl that forges the iron that doesn't break? No one answered. Not the preacher, not the barkeep, not even old Sivers, who knew the name of every horse, every bastard, and every grave in the hollow. So they started burning. First the tannery, then the widow Tamber's barn, then the haystack beside the chapel where Marion had once kneeled with a broken rosary and a mouth full of broken teeth. By the 4th night the preacher himself rode out to the forge. He didn't dismount, just stood in the snow, hands trembling on the reins, and said, "They want you, and they won't stop." Ruth stood in the doorway, soot on her cheeks, her mother's chain beneath her collar. "Why?" He swallowed hard. "They say a girl like you made something that should not have been made." Ruth stepped forward once. "They are right." Then she closed the forge door. She didn't run, she didn't bury the blade again. She unearthed it. The old plow horse's grave had sunken in, snow packed in its hollows. She dug with her hands until her knuckles split. When she pulled the blade from the earth, it sang, not aloud, but in her bones, a thin vibration like the first breath before a cry. She didn't oil it, didn't polish it. She made one adjustment, etched her own mark beside the smith, a ring split down the middle. She named the blade Ashfall. And she wore it. Not on her hip, but across her back, beneath a coat stitched from canvas and rawhide, every seam doubled, every button sewn with wire instead of thread. The next day she walked into the village square. The riders were waiting. They were sharpening their knives on the porch rails, feeding scraps to a dog that didn't blink. The pale woman rose when Ruth arrived, her eyes black as the iron she'd come to claim. "You know what you've done?" the woman asked. Ruth tilted her head. "Made something too fine for men to own." The woman smiled, but her teeth didn't change. "We had a contract. The smith broke it when he forged war steel without license. That debt don't vanish just because his blood stopped moving." Ruth's fingers found the ring under her collar. "I'm not him." "No, but you're worse. You make better things." Ruth stepped forward, snow crunching underfoot. "Then take it from me." The woman nodded. 4 riders dismounted. They came fast, no posturing, no show. They knew how to kill. They expected her to run. She didn't. The first fell with a broken wrist and a blade across his throat. The second ducked low and caught the backhand sweep across the belly, folding over like a trap sprung wrong. The third was careful, clever, slow, and Ruth feinted left, spun, and drove the pommel of Ashfall into her temple hard enough to make her legs shudder before she dropped. The fourth stopped moving, stared, then bolted. The others didn't follow. The pale woman raised her hand, called off the rest. Ruth stood in the snow, the blade black with blood, her coat split at the shoulder. "I don't want to kill you," the woman said, voice even. "I want what you made." Ruth said nothing. "You made the ring before the blade," the woman said. "That's the mistake. Rings bind, blades end. But you forged a promise before you forged the wound." Ruth stepped forward again. "I made the ring for a woman. I made the blade for what the world became after they tried to kill her for giving me breath." The pale woman sighed. Then she drew. Fast. Faster than most could track. But Ruth had waited years. And when Ashfall met the woman's blade, the ring on her chain rang like a bell. A steel screamed. One edge gave. Not Ruth's. The pale woman staggered back, blood slick on her arm. Her blade cracked at the hilt. She looked down like she'd just woken into a world she didn't understand. "You've no right," she hissed. "You're a girl born from a mistake." Ruth stepped close enough to smell the salt on her breath. "I was born from refusal." Then she took the woman's broken blade and drove it point first into the porch rail beside the preacher's door. "Leave," she said. And they did. Not that day. Not fully. But their fear had begun. Ruth didn't celebrate. She dragged the dead to the edge of the forest and built a cairn of stones. She gave their knives to the creek. She didn't sleep for 3 nights. But when she did, it was deep. And dreamless. They came back in the thaw. Not the pale woman, not the ones Ruth had cut down and buried in ice. These were others, not soldiers, not even riders, walkers, traders, drifters. They came with sacks on their backs and fear in their mouths. Word had spread. There was a forge where a girl forged names. Not steel names. Things you could wear, bury, kill with. They came because the world outside was breaking, and somewhere in the broken hollow there was iron that remembered what it meant to be bound in silence and lifted in rage. Ruth didn't ask what brought them. She could see it. Burned scars, empty sleeves, eyes that didn't blink when the wind howled. They'd been through it, each of them, and something in them recognized something in her, like broken glass recognizing its own cut. The first woman asked for a ring, plain and sharp-edged. "For my sister," she said. She drowned herself with a stone around her ankle because they told her she was a burden. The second wanted a needle, long and curved. "I used to sew the banners they hung before they burned our house. I want to stitch something back together." One man wanted a nail, 1 inch long, to drive through the tongue of the man who sold my name. Ruth forged it all. She charged what they could give: eggs, blankets, a name from a dead language, a kiss on the temple, and a truth no one else had heard, sometimes nothing. She didn't sleep often. She hammered in the dark. She quenched metal in milk and ash and wine. She carved marks into the tangs, some hers, some the symbols the smith had left behind, others older than that, found in scraps of bone sewn into the lining of her mother's last shawl. The people built lean-tos, then cabins, then homes. And a village began to grow around the forge. They called it nothing. No one dared name it. Naming was claiming, and Ruth had taught them that what was claimed could be taken. What was unnamed could live. But Ruth did not belong to them. She slept outside the ring of firelight, ate alone, spoke only when required. She did not smile. Her hands ached now in the cold, her joints beginning to grind from the long weight of work. But she didn't stop. Because she knew they'd return. The men behind the first men, the owners, the quiet men who never bled, who sat in cities and wrote laws in the margins of land deeds and contracts forged with threats instead of seals. And they came. Not with guns. With ink. A man in a dark coat arrived with a charter. Said the land Ruth forged on belonged to a company headquartered far east. Said she'd been operating without license. Said her work, her forge, her steel, it all belonged to the state now. Ruth didn't look up from her work. She placed a hot horseshoe in water, listened to it scream, then wiped her brow with her sleeve. "Which state?" she asked. The man blinked. "What?" "You said it belongs to the state. Which one?" He shifted. "West Blackland, under the Industrial Holdings Act, Section 17. Ruth stood. "You're 2 wars too late." She handed him a nail. "Drive that through your own foot on the way out, so you remember where you came from." He left. More came. A wagon full of bureaucrats and cowards with militia escort. Ruth forged no weapons that week. She built a gate. 10 feet high, 6 inches thick, ringed with iron forged in 5 kinds of fire. The people didn't ask questions. They just worked. Because she'd never called them to war, never told them they owed her anything, but she had given them shape, had given them a way to cut the bindings and stand straight. When the company men returned, they found the gate closed and a pile of contracts burned to ash in the road. That night Ruth dug again. Not for the blade. She dug for the letter her mother had once hidden inside the hem of her skirt. A single sheet, torn, blood-stained, written in a language Ruth didn't read. She carried it to the oldest woman in the village who had once been a nun before the monastery was raised. The woman held it under the firelight. "It's a lineage," she whispered. "Your mother's people, her mother's mother, back before the border cut this land." Ruth waited. "She had a name for you. She wrote it here." Ruth watched the fire. "I don't want it." The woman tilted her head. "Why?" Ruth's voice was low. "Because I already made my own." Spring came harsh and sudden. Floods ripped through the eastern fields. Cattle drowned. A fever took 3 of the children. Ruth forged urns from cold steel and carved names into their lids with the same chisel she used to shape blade edges. And then one night she felt the ground shift. Not a tremor, a knowing. Something was coming. Not the state, not the company, not men. A man. The man. The one who had ridden to her door when she was a child, when her mother had still prayed in secret and her father was still capable of cruelty without consequence. He returned with a new scar and a rifle older than sin. He came alone. He waited at the gate, hat in hand. She opened it herself. He didn't speak at first. Just looked at her like he was seeing something impossible. "I killed him," he said finally. "Your father." Ruth didn't move. "I didn't do it for justice. I did it for payment. Your mother gave me something to take it, a name, not yours." Ruth waited. "She said you'd make something one day. Said it'd be too late for her, but not too late for whoever came after. She paid me with that name." Ruth met his eyes. "Then we're even." "No," he said, "we're not." He reached into his coat and pulled out a box. Iron, hinged, wrapped in canvas. "She wanted you to have this." Ruth didn't touch it, not yet. "Why now?" "Because they're coming," he said. "The real ones, the ones who own the land under the land." He paused. "And because I've killed too many girls who looked like you to let another be hunted without knowing why." Ruth took the box. It was light. Inside a single ring. Gold. Unworn. Etched on the inside with 3 ribs and a broken sun. And a letter, written in her mother's hand. It ended with 5 words. Forgive nothing, become what's owed. Ruth didn't cry. She walked back to the forge. She placed the gold ring beside her first one. Then she lifted the blade and lit the forge to full. And this time the flame burned black. The forge screamed with heat like the mouth of a god. Ruth worked through the night, through the second and third. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She poured something older than knowledge into every strike, grief that had turned to grit, and love buried so deep it had taken on the shape of wrath. The iron in her hands wasn't raw, it was remembered. Fragments melted from old tools, rusted bits from plows used by women who bore 12 children and died nameless. She reforged them. She called them back. At dawn on the 4th day, she stopped. The thing she made wasn't a blade. It was many. 6 of them. Short curved, with an edge honed thinner than breath. Handles carved from elder wood, cured in ash. No ornament. No etching. Only the weight. She buried 4 of them. One at each corner of the hollow. One she gave to the old nun, whose hands trembled as she received it, but who did not ask what it was for. The last she kept. Word came like rain. Slow at first, then a flood. Towns burned east of the range. Mines collapsed without warning. Girls vanished from workhouses in the night, and no inquiries were opened. The owners moved like shadows, filing deeds under names that couldn't be traced, seizing water rights, flattening hills to carve roads lined with chain and wire. And they came for her. No riders this time. Not even walkers. They sent children. Thin boys in pressed collars, reciting legal threats written by ghosts. Girls with scars who looked half-starved, bearing bundles wrapped in wool and eyes that didn't blink. But they didn't come to beg. They came to see, to ask, to listen. And Ruth gave them everything. Every name, every method, every mistake. She taught them how to temper with vinegar, how to file steel without drawing a spark, how to make a ring not as ornament but as anchor, how to bend without ever breaking. Then she sent them back. To wait, to build, to burn when the time came. The final night came quiet. No horses, no boots. Just smoke on the horizon and the smell of salt again, sharp and close, the scent that had followed the first blade all those years ago. They walked this time. A full line of them, dressed not for war but for harvest, coats of black canvas, gloves of kid leather, tools tucked into belts where pistols should have been. They didn't smile. They didn't speak. The people did not meet them. They'd already gone. South through the pass Ruth had cleared herself, weeks before. She sent them with wagons, with seed, with iron, told them no names, no farewells, told them only that they were not running, they were growing somewhere else. Only the nun remained, watching from the chapel ruin. She sang as they passed, not hymns, songs from older places, songs with teeth. Ruth waited at the forge. She wore her coat of ash and rawhide, no armor. No rings. Only the blade. Ashfall hung on her back, and beside it, slung across her shoulder, the last of the forged knives, curved and gleaming, hungry with promise. The leader stepped forward. He wore white. Perfectly white. Not stained, not wrinkled. He looked like a man untouched by the world. He looked like the world before the scream. "You're the daughter," he said. Ruth didn't answer. "You forged beyond your station. You woke a craft we buried for good reason." Still she was silent. "You think this makes you strong. It makes you a myth, and myths get hunted until they're bones." Ruth drew the blade. Not fast. Not for show. Just enough to let the cold edge shine. He didn't flinch. "Tell me," he said, "where's your army now?" Ruth looked at him. At all of them. Then past them. At the sky. The wind shifted. And she said, "I was never making weapons." His mouth curled. "No. I was making answers." Then she moved. They weren't ready. They thought she'd come alone. They hadn't seen the children watching from the ridgeline, cloaked in bark and dirt, with slings wrapped around their arms and blades hidden in the hems of coats. They hadn't noticed the wells dug too deep in the earth, filled not with water but oil. They hadn't known the forge wasn't just a place, it was a signal. A kindling. The first fire. The battle didn't last long. Because Ruth hadn't trained them to fight like soldiers. She trained them to fight like survivors. And survivors don't win with pride. They win with purpose. With scars. With knowing there's no going back, only forward through flame. Ruth killed the man in white. Not with ashful. With the ring. The first one. The one she'd swallowed and later worn. She shoved it between his teeth and broke his jaw shut with her palm. He died choking on the iron he thought he owned. When it was done, the forge still stood. She didn't. They found her slumped at the anvil. Blood on her side. Hands still warm from the hilt. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The girl who had been born nameless had written her name in heat and steel and silence. The people buried her deep, under the floor of the forge, with the blade, with the rings, with the names. And above it they left no stone. Only fire, forever lit, so that anyone passing by, anyone hunted or silenced or forgotten would know. Here was the place where a girl was left wounded for birthing a girl, and forged the world before she forged her blade.